So I think the entire British exit from Brexit happened because Britain wanted to be more white, but today you have a brown prime minister. That's a source of excitement for me.
I genuinely believe that we as Indians need to start celebrating more Sachin Bansal, Ritesh Agarwal, Nitin Kamath and whatnot at a global stage. They are giving back to India. They are actual Indian origin. Naman, welcome once again on my channel. Glad to do. Cheers with you on chai. How are you doing and what are we going to be talking about today?
I am doing fantastic and thank you so much for the invite. Happy Diwali to all the wonderful viewers. I truly hope that you had a wonderful time with your family and you must have gained quite a few weight because who doesn't love carbohydrate and sugar during the festivities? I have absolutely no idea, Shatakshi, what are we going to talk about, but look forward to an enriching discussion.
Sure. So before I talk about what we are going to be talking about, Naman, you owe me a mic. Now that you're coming on my channel for the third time, and very excited to have you again on my channel. And we are going to be talking about all things Rishi Sunak, all things UK economic collapse, and giving our perspectives on what is going right in the world of UK and what is going wrong. So let's start with Rishi Sunak. And of course, this video is sponsored by Global Governance Initiative, but more about that towards the end of this video. Let's start with Rishi Sunak. What do you think of the guy?
He's phenomenal, and he is a quintessential Sharma ji ka beta, who was not born in India, who was born in the UK and went to undergrad for his undergrad in Oxford, then thereafter did his MBA from Stanford and worked with Goldman because that's perhaps the highest calling of the mankind. And then thereafter worked with hedge fund as a partner and has been associated with UK politics for quite some time, and it's remarkable what he's achieved in such a short span of time. And every immigrant across the world has to be immensely proud of his achievement because whatever he's achieved, it's incredible, and it's very difficult to achieve so in such a short span of time. So that's about Rishi Sunak. And one thing that's to be told about Rishi Sunak is that he's becoming the Prime Minister of UK at a very historic moment in global history. It is a time when the UK economy is somewhat crushed. The inflation is in double digits. The energy prices are soaring. The longest running monarch is dead. The shortest living prime minister has resigned. So it's truly a remarkable time, and the global economy along with the UK economy will have a high expectation of this wartime economic prime minister.
That's very beautiful articulation, Aman, and we are going to be talking about why the entire UK economic crisis happened, and we will go really, really deep into the history, how the entire foundation of the phenomenal fall of UK really happened. But Naman, I also wanted to comment on one thing. The fact that the man is a Stanford MBA has been lashed upon by so many MBA admissions consultants, and we can have a separate chat about it. But it is just sad that in a world where the value of a degree is being questioned, MBA consultants are latching upon to the only Stanford MBA perhaps who just became the UK Prime Minister. But what about our chai wala who perhaps we don't know about his degrees, but is one of the most phenomenal Prime Ministers we have had in the history of India. So I wanted to share that perspective as well. So Naman, like you said, the inflation is at its peak, double-digit inflation. The entire currency has been devalued. There's a housing crisis going on in UK. There is unemployment. It is becoming hard to live in London and many other cities of UK. And people also suspect that a banking crisis is also about to come. Let's start from the start. Where do you think this all started from?
Absolutely, I think, and let's agree to disagree on our chai wala who is doing remarkable or not so remarkable work in India, and hopefully you will make a detailed video on this. But to address your question on how it started and when did it start, the misconception is that it all began with the financial crisis of the 2008 and 9. But we need to go back in history and see how Britain was doing right after the Second World War. If you were to compare the UK's economy with all the comparable economies of the continental Europe, you would realize that it wasn't growing fast. It was one of the slowest growing economies right after the Second World War. And in fact, there were a lot of debates in the 1970s that what led to this sleepy economic crisis in the UK, and then thereafter we saw the rise of Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s, who deregulated various aspects of the economy. She also dismantled all the labor unions, and from there on began the economic rise of the UK as one of the financial sector hub. And I think it's a saying that in the 19th century, when if UK was the factory of the world, the way China is today, in 21st century UK was the bank for the world. And because the UK economy was so dependent on financial sector, it was obviously prone to a lot of risks. And this risk came in the form of the financial crisis of the 2008 and 9, which ruined various aspects of the fundamentals of the UK economy. And what happened thereafter was truly devastating. People wanted to blame someone, and according to you, who could have that blame, who could share the blame?
So are you telling me people wanted to blame at a global level, or people wanted to blame at a local England level?
At the local UK level. So when your economy is collapsing the way it happened, perhaps in various aspects of Indian history, people will be ravished, and they would have to pick someone to blame. There's something similar happened during the Germany of the Hitler era, where they blamed the Jews for all the mistakes. Pakistan blames India for all the perils in the domestic politics. Similarly, in the UK, they decided to blame the migrants, the immigrants.
Oh, okay.
Right? And because of blaming the immigrants, what's the best thing that they can do? They can start blaming the bureaucrats in Brussels. They decided to envisage a UK without the Europe. They clamored for the BREXIT that eventually happened, and from there on the productivity levels went down the trenches, and the UK economy today is in such a catastrophic point where your real wages are less than what they were 13 years ago. Living standards are deteriorating, and productivity is at an all-time low. It's lower than what you would see in Slovenia and Germany and various other parts of Europe. Just take out the London from the UK and you would realize how terrible UK is doing economically.
Sure. Naman, thanks a lot for sharing that. I think for our audience, it might be a little bit better that we talk about the 2008 global financial crisis, the fall of Lehman Brothers, which impacted London as well. What happened after that? What do you think really happened?
Wonderful question. I think the significant phenomenon that happened after the fall, after the financial crisis was, number one, look at the trading partners of UK. The primary trading partner of UK was European Union, and because of the fall, we definitely saw a downfall in economic activity in the European Union, and thereafter the blame game began, and Brexit happened. The internal politics was quite interesting in those era, and because of that, UK decided to become a lot insular, right? They traded less. The immigration collapsed, and usually this is a situation that leads to lower productivity. And I'm sure you will, and we'll share a detailed article in the description where it stated how productivity declines took place in the UK after the 2008 financial crisis.
Sure, thank you so much, Naman. For our viewers, perhaps I could just take a step back and help them understand how productivity is largely involved in the entire GDP equation. So if you have to improve the economics of a nation, either you will need land, you will need labor, you will need capital, and you put all of these things together, and outside it's a mathematical equation. You multiply that by productivity. So if you have land, comma capital, comma labor, and you put all these three things in a bucket with the comma next to each other, and productivity eventually sits outside. So it was because of poor productivity, is what Naman you are saying, that they were still struggling to bounce back from the 2008 global financial crisis, and of course coupled with Brexit as well. Let's talk about pandemic. Then the pandemic came, right? A lot of countries were struggling, and then it is typically said that UK took more time than the rest of the countries to make its economy bounce back, right? A lot of countries, including India, were still bouncing back. I think one good thing or bad thing that happened with us was the complete lockdown. When there is complete lockdown, if there is one thing that will happen with the economy, is just it will go up. There is not much worse that can happen, right? In the complete lockdown, there is supply disruption that has already taken place. It's a complete shut because you are not even allowing the demand to consume anything. So would you have any view on why UK actually took more time during the pandemic to bounce back than the rest?
I may not have a detailed answer to this, but I would like to elaborate briefly on the productivity point, because in context to UK it's important. And like rightfully mentioned, that's the equation. But from the physics standpoint, if we were to look at productivity, it's very simple. It's output divided by input, right? You put in less input and you should gain maximum output. And when will that happen? That will happen when the government is investing in people, they're investing in skill sets, they're investing in technology. And when will that happen? That will happen when people are when immigrants are being welcomed, when they're trading with the rest of the world, when they are... So look at any global major empire. Look at Harappan civilization, look at Mesopotamian civilization, look at Egyptian civilization, look at the US after the Cold War. You would realize they grew because of the trade. And they grew because they welcomed the immigrants. They did not isolate themselves in a global ecosystem. And perhaps because of this, there was sharp decline in productivity. This could be one of the many reasons, but this is one of the major reasons why this happened. And then there is domestic politics of appeasement. It's usually said that good economics is bad politics, and we saw that happening very, very often, especially how things turned out with the former Prime Minister Liz Truss. So that's what my views are on the larger economic situation, and specifically in context to COVID, I think the entire globe suffered, and I may not have real reasons why this impacted the UK the most, but hypothesizing with the previous trajectory, excessive reliance on one sector, that's the financial sector, no focus on building global trading partners. The FTA with India is still due. No focus on resolving or focusing on the core fundamentals. We saw how liquidity was injected during the tenure of Liz Truss, and various external shocks that resulted in a perilous situation for the UK.
Sure. Thank you so much, Naman, for interlinking innovation to productivity. I might have a different view on that, and I'm thinking out loud. So for example, we have discussed how India many times may be really strong nation on jugaad, but we are not able to innovate a lot more because we are high on population. When a country struggles with lack of labor, then they push themselves to actually innovate on productivity because you have less people. You have no other choice. You can't actually, it's a long turn curve, right? For you to have a non-aging population, have a young population which is growing, so you start innovating. So you never know. I think UK might actually be able to renovate themselves and leverage Brexit as a strength of itself, that now we are less on labor and hence we will be able to better ourselves on innovation. I'm thinking out loud. That could be one of the arguments. And there is one more thing about innovation, right? When US innovated, it was the classic Cold War era. US versus Russia. US wanted to outbeat Russia in the entire space wars, right? And this entire existential crisis of us versus them, when UK is feeling threatened, could actually put a little bit more pressure upon themselves to innovate more. But of course, it's going to be, I will allow you to speak, but of course, it's going to be that context is little different. They are not out and out either on a war with Russia or in a Cold War with another nation. Of course, there are allies and there are not so good allies, but happy to hear your perspective. I see you want to say something.
2 points, very well put. But if we were to look at the most innovative ecosystem today, one name that comes to my mind today is Silicon Valley. Look at all the behemoths of the global economy, global industry. You would realize these are built by immigrants. Travis Kalanick built the Uber. Adam Neumann, back in the days, built the Airbnb. He was an Israeli. And Sundar Pichai is leading the Alphabet. And so I think industries, ecosystems, organizations, countries, they all thrive when you are open to explore new relationships, when you're open to welcoming new people. You will not thrive when you're cloistered in your mini circle in a global age. That will not happen. Innovations in India happened after the liberalization of 1991. It didn't happen in the early 60s and the 50s, although that was needed, the cloistered economy, because you wanted to safeguard traditional industries from the external competition. But real innovation happened after the 90s. Back then we had just two cars to choose from, and there was a huge waiting line for telephones and the cars. But today you can get a car delivered in your doorsteps within a week. That wasn't the case before. That's the point about innovation. And the second point is about the UK positioning with Russia. Russia is a dominant player, at least in the energy sector, and the positioning of the UK has been quite acrimonious to what the Russia would entail. So unfortunately, the situation in the Western Europe is not ideal in terms of its energy security, and Russia has a huge role to play. So that cannot be discounted.
Sure, Naman. I appreciate both the points. On the first point, I genuinely believe there is no one single path to enhancing innovation. So let's agree to disagree, perhaps. But we both share the same opinion. Better diversity leads to better ideation, better innovation. But I also believe that many a times scarcity could also be a reason for innovation as well. That's one of my hypotheses, right? I'm trying to play a devil's advocate. You raise a very important point, which is the second point. The Ukraine-Russia war, which has literally screwed up the entire Europe, right? On food security front, on energy security front. The entire inflation. So for those of you who do not understand inflation, it is the rising prices of goods and services, right? So UK actually has been one of the biggest importer of Russian energy services, be it the shale gas or be it their oil, because of the entire sanction. And whenever sanctions take place, we will put up a screenshot of the game theory 2x2. Both the parties actually suffer. So it's a loss for both of them. So if Russia is suffering, then UK is suffering as well. Similarly, because of the entire disruption by the grains from Ukraine, there is a food energy crisis, food security crisis, right? So now there is an inflation taking place for UK because they wanted to support US, right? And the entire NATO allegiances as well. Do you think in such a poor economic scenario, UK could have afforded to take a much more softer stance?
Absolutely, yes. And I was talking to a few friends of mine from Russia. I think Russia is definitely suffering, but I think in the long run they seems to be winning in various fronts. Their currency is stronger now in comparison to what it was before, and if I were to be a devil's advocate for Russia, the NATO expansion in Russia's backyard for a country that has already suffered the ravages of the USA's aggression, it's not. It's to some extent justifiable because they want to secure their own national interest, as UK would want to secure its own national interest. But it seems to have impacted the Germans and the British way much more than what it seems to have impacted the Russians. And a softer stance should have been taken, and would be pragmatic, not just for the egos of the leaders, but also for the general wellness of its citizens, because I don't think citizens of any nation would want to suffer from food scarcity. It's because of UK's actions or inactions. Countries in North Macedonia to Serbia, they seem to be not Serbia, but North Macedonia to Albania, they seem to be facing quite a few challenges, and population there is very poor, and the responsibility lies on many people. And to be honest, I don't think USA and the UK are the protector of the democracy. We know how Churchill responded to India's desperation, how USA has been to Iraq, to Vietnam, so on and so forth. So those are my controversial views, but I thought it should be said out loud.
Sure, Naman. Thank you so much for saying that out loud. I might have a different reaction to that. I think when you have had such strong alliances with another nation state, when you at a global stage stand for humanitarian values, you stand for democratic values, it would also have been fairly hard for UK to say that, hey, we are not going to be providing help to you, right? But at the same time, there is a lot of hypocrisy involved as well when they go out of their way to help Ukraine on humanitarian grounds. At the same time, these countries have been involved in a lot of anti-humanitarian work in Afghanistan and many other Middle Eastern countries. So pretty tough decision to not back US and the other NATO, right, when you are leading that entire group. Let's talk about now Liz Truss. So the former Prime Minister steps down, Mr. Boris, and then Liz Truss comes. She wants to now really change the economy. She wants to look like a very strong leader. She comes up with a mini budget, and she now wants to, interestingly, tax rich people less and poor people relatively more, right? Because she wanted to put a slab on it. So what she eventually did was, for context, she said that we are going to be having a tax, and she wanted to tax the businesses less because her entire assumption was that if businesses would be taxed less, they are going to invest more money into the market. That will lead to more jobs and better economy, right? A long-term solution. But that got an entire backfire from IMF because IMF said there is income inequality because of such actions. And not only that, Liz Truss' entire mini budget actually put a cap on the energy spend as well. That means that if Naman hypothetically is the king of London and he ends up spending, let's say, 5,000 pounds on his energy bills, and Shatakshi, I'm the poor one in London, I end up spending 500 pounds. Let's say the entire capping is done on 2,000 pounds. Naman, being rich and easily able to afford a 5,000 pound bill, still ends up spending 2,000, and I, being poor, I will still have to spend 2,000 if at all my bill comes out to be like that, right? That means that there is a deficit. Who pays that deficit? If Naman is not paying his part and Shatakshi eventually doesn't pay her part, who pays that? The government pays for it, right? In a poor economy, when the inflation is at its high, Liz Truss budget basically said that we are going to be paying these energy companies because, and in a world where energy costs are already high, right? They came up with the entire government debt bond model. What is government debt? Government debt is a manner through which government borrows money from the larger public like you and me with the hope to the public that we are going to be returning this money with an interest rate after 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever down the line. The more amount of time you spend sitting on that bond and not redeeming it, the more money you get. But then that backfired as well because the entire Liz Truss government eventually the entire mini budget did not receive good will from the investors. Investors lost hope in the entire mini budget and the currency devalued. If you were the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, and if you had an option of changing the economy, right? There is energy crisis, there is food crisis, there is entire cost of living is going up. What else could you have done?
That's a phenomenal question. Unfortunately, I'm not the Prime Minister, and I don't intend to be. Nor am I capable. So, but I think what Rishi Sunak is proposing makes a lot of logical sense. And I think the policies that Liz Truss implemented were very expansionary in nature, like you mentioned. And such expansionary fiscal and monetary policy usually leads to inflation, demand side inflation, to be precise. And I wouldn't have gone into that aspect. I would have followed through what the US is doing or what India is doing, where you are raising the interest rates and minimizing the liquidity in the UK economy, which was to some extent was corrected with a revised budget. And something along those lines, I would have taken my economic actions. I would have also ensured that India's FTA should have been signed because that's extremely important, not just for India, but also for the UK. And there's been an inadvertent delay for a long time now, and I hopefully it gets signed soon.
Sure. Thank you so much, Naman, for sharing that. And if I were to take a step back, there are four methods in which the GDP of the country could be improved, right? Either you increase investments, which has been, for example, Modi's larger policy ever since he took the office in India, the Invest in India, and the all the investment schemes were part of the entire investment schemes, right? When foreign investments come to a nation, it leads to larger jobs, it leads to larger consumption, etc. So that's point number one. Another is consumption. So for example, India's story currently of rising GDP is the consumption story. So that's the second way in which you could have increased the GDP. The third one is the net export. So you could actually produce more and eventually enhance your GDP, which is the China's model till now, right? And the fourth one is government expenditure. It seemed like she wanted to increase more investments into the economy. However, her entire logic of taxing the rich less is very rarely admitted to be very practical by the leading economists. In fact, it is considered to be typically foolish by leading economists as well. If I were to take a step back, and now I think, Naman, I'm kind of moving towards the final wrap-up session as well. If I am Rishi Sunak, there are two things that I would do. First one, kind of taking a full circle, which is focus on productivity, right? There is no other way out for you to, and that is also interestingly a quick win, that you can take a lot of digitization efforts, a lot of migration efforts that could eventually lead to a lot of productivity and innovation, right? Of course, there are much more details that we can get into. And the second one is energy security through climate impact measures. The entire disruption happened because UK was just so much dependent upon Russia for oil and gas. If now they don't start working upon energy security, that could be from renewable perspective, offshore, onshore wind, renewable energy, and there are multiple other renewable energy, right? It could be a good answer on the right lines, right? That's my final two recommendations if I were to look at UK's economic collapse. And of course, there are way more expert and pundits better than me who would have their views, but I wanted to share that. Happy to hear if you believe there is anything else that could be done by UK in the current economic crisis. I just do not want to leave our audience hanging with what has happened. I would like to also help them understand what could be done so that they develop that business brain and that policy brain.
Absolutely. And before you forget, or I forget, I think it's also important and critical that we also speak about the consequences for India with the new Prime Minister in the UK. There's a lot of debate and talks about how positive it would be for India. So it's important and critical that we talk about and cover that aspect as well. And talking about the recommendation bit, I think I concur with your views here. I think Rishi Sunak would keep those actions in mind and will come up with much more innovative solutions. And I like his idea that in his case, good politics is good economics, and I hope he conquers and follows through on that.
Sure, I completely agree. I think the guy is a shrewd banker. In an economic collapse, there is no better way of handling it than by a banker. I'm kind of reminiscing about Manmohan Singh leading India during similar economic crisis. So I think he's the right brain for the country, and we wish him the best as well. And of course, I don't think he's an Indian. Indians should start taking credit for it. There is I actually kind of fear that the more India starts celebrating the laurels of Rishi Sunak, the harder it is going to be for him, because he's going to be put under larger scrutiny under the UK government. Happy to hear, Naman, any last comments. I kind of see you changing expressions. So do you have anything about Rishi Sunak before we wrap up?
I think it's a matter of great admiration that someone that has origins in India via his in-laws or via his grandfather is now the Prime Minister of UK, and there's nothing wrong in celebrating his successes. It's in a way an inspiration to millions of migrants, millions of immigrants who may see a person of their own color. However, it's also critical that we don't overdo things. I think whatever successes and laurels that he has achieved is because of his own merit or luck or whatever. And unfortunately, in this case, India had a minimal or minimalistic contribution to his successes. Talking about how it will impact India, I think I'm very skeptical of this idea that Indian origins CEOs or Indian origin prime ministers and presidents are doing way too much for India. That I don't think has happened much. In consulting, there's a saying that in God we trust, but for everyone else on the table, we need to bring in data. And if we were to look at the empirical data, we would realize that it's usually very hard for an immigrant who has to prove his worth to the members of his political party that he is a British citizen. So his aim and objective would be to work for Britain, not for India. Whatever happens with India is inconsequential to how it progresses. But at the end of the day, he's a British Prime Minister, and he will keep Britain in his account when he is making thrives for relationships with India. But regardless of the Prime Minister, be it Boris Johnson or be it Theresa May or be it Liz Truss, India-UK relations have been in upward trajectory. India is not a banana republic. India is a major economy, even surpassed the UK a few months ago. And India's rise and collaboration and linkages with India is in UK's best interest. And same is the case with India, because India has shared good relations with the UK. And hopefully this new appointment of Rishi Sunak will transform and bring forth great successes to both the nations and for the rest of the world.
Sure. Thanks, Amar, for that view. I have just two more reactions. I kind of disagree with that opinion that we should just continue to celebrate people who were sparsely involved with India. I kind of, as a practicing Hindu, I like that there is a practicing Hindu sitting not just for UK, but just any part of the world, right? And I think the same emotion will be for a Muslim seeing another practicing Muslim and all the religions, right? But I genuinely believe that we as Indians need to start celebrating more Binny Bansal, Sachin Bansal, Ritesh Agarwal, Nitin Kamath and whatnot at a global stage. They are giving back to India. They are actual Indian origin. I think people who want to take inspiration, they feel like, oh, this guy is having a skin color like me, that's good, but that guy did not make his living out of India. That guy is going to put Britain first and not India first. So let's start celebrating those people who are based out of India, who are origined out of India, and who are giving back to India as well. That's my time with Naman on this chat. And about Global Governance Initiative. Global Governance Initiative runs a Plan B for UPSC aspirant, and it helps people, young professionals like you, to pivot into the world of development consulting, Government of India and management consulting. So shall you be looking for a Plan B in UPSC? Feel free to check out globalgovernanceinitiative.org, and of course subscribe to this channel so that we get the motivation and we get to know that you are liking the content that we are bringing out around government, around politics, and of course a lot of career related videos as well. Like this video and share it with your friends so that they get to know about all the interesting content that we are bringing out for all of you. We'll see you very much soon. I know, Naman, my glass is empty. Yours is empty too. Cheers.